Welcome. My name is Marnie. I'm the Cultural Preservation Specialist here with the 1854 Treaty Authority. I oversee the education and outreach programming. Really glad that you all have decided to come out and join us today. Who is enjoying their first time being in the 1854 office today? Welcome, welcome. Cool, cool. Who knows what we are, who we are, what we do? We're an intertribal natural resource management agency working for the Boys Fort and Grand Portage bands, implementing and protecting off reservation treaty harvest. And educating the public too on what it means to be a settler on ceded lands is a really important aspect of what we do, all of us who live here too. And so we brought our colleague Erik Redix in to talk a little bit about the North Shore tributaries that when the land changed hands. Some of our predecessors had some issues with trying to understand the names and then translating them into what they're now called on the map. This is the 1852 Owen survey. It was a survey of the landscape before this became a Minnesota territory. I'm going to leave this out here. Anybody who can come and check it out. We just ask that you do not open the map. If you would like to fold out the map, there's a copy of one back there. You can check it out yourself. For anybody who's here joining us today, you want to take home your very own copy of the translated map that we put together last year. There are copies out by the front desk. If you'd like to see what it looks like, I'm sure Erik has one in his presentation too.
I do.
Behind her. I'll get this going in a minute, but reports.
Oh, yeah. Hey, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Jeff Ruff. I'm the head of the Department of History at UMD. And we're really thrilled to have, I think this is the third time 1854 Treaty Authority has done an event as part of our annual Twin Ports Festival of History. So thanks to Marnie and thanks to Michelle and everybody at 1854. And thanks to all of you for coming out. We have a whole series of events running from tonight all the way through next week, Wednesday, yeah. So if you want to go to a few more, you can just Google Twin Ports Festival of History and look through the schedule. But anyway, I'll turn it back over to you, Marnie, and thanks again.
We need more chairs. We certainly have more chairs.
Hi, I don't know if there's a spot for a chair.
There is right in front.
Cool.
You guys may even come in and sit on the floor if you're like, I'm a floor sitter myself. Yeah. Erik?
Oh, yeah. Bonjour, Miss going on Indigenous cause, Nigasi and Dudain, Modawa, Saga, Egating, and Ojibwe. Get you on the coming and in the Oki guy. My name is Erik Redix. I'm the Ojibwe language coordinator at Grand Portage. I'm originally from Wakutere in Hayward, Wisconsin. I moved to Grand Portage, the North Shore, about 8 years ago now, I think. Whatever 18 to 2025 is up 7. Yeah, so 7 years ago. And yeah, my wife is a Grand Portage band member. In fact, my father-in-law, this room is named after my father-in-law. So yeah. So, and I bring that up because one of the origins of this project was one of my early before I moved up to Grand Portage, I was, for a couple of years, I was kind of traveling back and forth, my now wife's family and we were staying with them. And one of those trips when we were rushing, I previously worked at, here at Duluth at UMD and American Indian Studies. Some of my former colleagues are here tonight. One of the genesis for this project was on one of those trips back and forth. It was at my in-laws' house, and my now wife's uncle came, and he was he retired a few years back, Rick Novitsky. He was a long time superintendent, or I forget what the titles are when you're the head of state parks, but he was the head of Grand Portage State Park. And he was telling me what his colleague, I think he's a naturalist down in Tedagooch, Kurt Mead, was talking about the book that and the map that Marnie was showing. And I was trying to get on the road. Rick was like, "Oh, you gotta look at this map. It's amazing. It's got these Ojibwe names." And I was like, yeah, that's cool, Rick. I mean, I gotta get home, but that, that's cool. But, and so from there, and, the other kind of genesis for this project is when, eventually, a lot of visits, but also then especially living up in Grand Portage. You do a lot of traveling between here and Duluth and being from Wisconsin, even more, but traveling Highway 61 and passing all these road signs. And I'll be like, I wonder what the Ojibwe name is. I want to get back to that project that Rick showed me, back in 2017 and whatnot. And, I first made this trip when I was like 19 years old in the 90s. And I remember my first impression of the North Shore Drive because I'd never been north of Duluth. And, I was like, oh, it's so beautiful, but at some point, you're kind of like in that 3-hour drive, you're like, all right, I get it, it's beautiful, like, let's just get to where we're going. And so, when you live in Grand Portage and, you're, a lot of, even your groceries come from Duluth, and all these other things, like my 2 daughters were born in Duluth, and live in Grand Portage, they don't deliver babies anymore in Grand Marais, so everything you have to come down to Duluth for. And, especially when the border was closed, I mean, we did a lot of grocery shopping, and we do a lot of grocery shopping in Thunder Bay, but for that, I think 2 years, it was all Duluth, so. But anyway, so, that trip back and forth, I was like, oh, man, I really want to know more about these names, and in the midst of all those trips. So anyway, so eventually, I taught for a while in Grand Portage, and eventually, when I accepted my current role, that was one of the projects I really wanted to see happen, and this project kind of spurred it along, seeing what our colleagues over at Boys Ford had done with, getting the Ojibwe names for, lakes around Boys Ford. So I was like, we can do something similar with that Owens map. And, so that was really the genesis of this project. And, and the third thing that it really influenced it was at Grand Portage State Park, the longtime superintendent of Grand Portage National Monument, Tim Cochran, who's written extensively about Grand Portage and Isle Royale and whatnot. He had put together this map based on his research, which is the kind of darkened portion of this of the map here, and talking about the traditional use areas of the Grand Portage Band. And so, from in my role now, I really wanted to push that narrative that, and not only for Marnie was talking about educating our non-native neighbors, but also for like people on the reservation too. It's like, and I kind of grew up with this mentality too of like, okay, well, we do a few things with, exercise and treaty rights, and in Portage, a lot of moose hunting and things like that. Where I'm from, Lakota, it's kind of based on spearfishing off reservation, but people don't necessarily think of the ceded territory as the same as the reservation. And I really wanted to like put out this map to kind of smash through that. And, whether it's practical to do like all harvest activities off reservation, probably not, but at least get people thinking, Grand Portage band members thinking about like their land is more than just a reservation, if that makes sense. That Grand Portage band members have these treaty rights and have this historic tie to this land that isn't just this reservation, but it's this whole area. And the other thing that with that is that Grand Portage is really, I always liken it to like North Korea, South Korea, in the sense that, there was no division prior to 1812 between Fort William and Grand Portage. It was just all the same band. And much like how Korea has been just, divided by a border, so has like the Grand Portage band by the international border. So, getting people to think about that more, and the next generation to think about that, because you talk to older people and even people my age, and they talk a lot about this connection to Whitefish Lake on the Ontario side, how that was the main wild rice resource for the Grand Portage band. So there's again, around certain harvest activities, there's an awareness, but in my role, I really want people to think about really deeply about, this idea of traditional Grand Portage territory, if that makes sense. So, but yeah, so that's the map. And, so yeah, noble intentions and sheer boredom on long drive. So, so I'm gonna talk a little bit, kind of skim the surface a little bit, and if you really want to get deep in the weeds, a year ago, I published in this University of Minnesota Open Rivers Journal, it's probably easier just to Google like rivers of the North Shore, open rivers, than try to remember all that, that website link, but there I really get into like the specific documents and things I'm only gonna mention in passing. And also the Rivers of the North Shore map has a QR code that if you scan that, it goes to our partners at the Grand Portage National Monument, which has the map, but it also has a link to this Open Rivers Journal, as well as it has audio file for pronunciation of all these names. So, yeah, it was kind of a 360 effort, and everything kind of came together really well, last spring, in fact, about a year ago. So, and the culmination of that was we were able to, pictured here is, the commissioner of MnDOT, along with, the local kind of, liaison in Duluth with our tribal council in Grand Portage. And they're next to the, Montadube and Montagakowini Zibe, Devil Track River sign. I'm gonna talk about the name Devil Track River. But this along with the Blue Reed River were we have 3 signs, bilingual signs off the reservation and 2 on. And so we really worked with MnDOT to create this signage off reservation and really promote these names. Now it's limited, right? Because my goal would be to have a giant QR code that as people are driving by, they can scan it and say, oh, what does that mean? And, quickly discover that Montadube and Montagakowini Zibe doesn't mean Devil Track River and what the story is behind that. But I feel like it's like a good start. And I'll talk about why that place in particular was where we held the unveiling last May, but, because the name kind of symbolizes the importance of this project, for me anyway, but, yeah, so, and our goal is we have 3 off reservation just north of Grand Marais. And my goal is, and hopefully state budgets stay, good, or at least we could wait 15 years till the signs are retired and we can, the next round of signs are all bilingual. I would like to go all the way to like Duluth, but, not 61, so. Yeah, so that, that was a kind of really a team effort between, the RTC at Grand Portage and our partners at, MnDOT and Cook County as well. They've been a great partner. They, a little less red tape, I'll say, I'll be frank, like they just slap these signs up. It's like, hey, we want some signs on our county road. MnDOT and stuff, and they just slapped them up there. And, yeah, so it's pretty, incredible as you're driving up to Gunflint, driving, in Cook County proper, and you see these signs.
What is the land base of Grand Portage?
The land base?
Yeah, the land, how many acres?
Oh, 54,000 acres? Yeah. It's in the 50s anyway, yeah, acres. So, yep, so anyway, so, yeah, so we're kind of plugging away, and like I say, I'd like to see more bilingual signage, not just in Cook County, but, the whole shore, so. And, and well, there's, I guess, a 4th or 5th, I don't know what I'm up to, kind of, purpose of this map too, was that, to me, Highway 61 is like the iconic Minnesota roadway, this stretch of Highway 61 from Duluth to the border, and thousands, if not more, visitors every year, come up there and, like, I'm from Wisconsin, I've never been to Door County, right? Like, Wisconsin doesn't have that same kind of thing where all Wisconsinites do the same stuff. I've never been to the Wisconsin State Fair, but like, every Minnesotan, I feel like, that you talk to, no matter what part of the state, they go to the North Shore at some point on vacation, they go to the Minnesota State Fair. And so there's a sense of Minnesotaness with this stretch of highway. And so I thought it was really important to kind of push across this idea that this was traditionally Grand Portage band territory. So by having the bilingual signage, so. So yeah, coming back to the David Owens expedition, it's a geological survey of minerals in the old Northwest in 1847. So, and this was like really difficult. I won't get too much in the weeds about the Owens expedition. But one of the good things about it as a source, well, 2 things. So I'm gonna back up a little bit. One is that, this was definitely like a colonial expedition to see what kind of minerals were on the North Shore and catalog them for future mineral exploration and exploitation. So that's a little problematic, right? But, I always tell my students this, when I'm teaching, is that like, you know, these things happened in the past and they were like, you know, typically like not for good reasons, right, necessarily, but, it's like, yeah, without apologizing for these things, you have to kind of be amazed by the effort it took to do these things, right? So you have these, non-native guys coming to the North Shore. The North Shore's, you know, I mean, that's why it has so many visitors. It's a rugged, beautiful landscape, but very difficult to, live in, you know, when another thing I always tell students and anybody that'll listen to me is like, when you go back to the treaty era, there's almost like 2,000 people in Laputa Ray Band in Wisconsin. There's only about 500 people listed in the Grand Portage Band. And granted, you know, the band was cut in half by the Canadian border, but, you know, that speaks to two things. One is that, you know, this North Shore landscape is really rugged and difficult to make a living in, but also just there's a little bit less wild rice than other places in Ojibwe country. So, but anyway, regardless of all that, you know, these American geologists and scientists come to the North Shore and they just put in this like ungodly effort to like catalog all these things. But, and again, you know, if that is what it is, you know, we can kind of go back and forth on that. But the one thing about the Owens expedition is that as I got into the names, is there's other sources that kind of like list off these names, but the Owens expedition really was the best source for the Ojibwe names because they worked with informed, you know, Ojibwe people, what they called informants, on the ground. So other sources we have for North Shore River names, they're very, and geographic teachers, they're very much like people in places like La Pointe or in Wisconsin or over in White Earth. And they don't have that direct experience with Ojibwe people that lived there like the Owens expedition did. So when I was going through this, there were very few names that weren't in the Owens expedition that I like trusted really. And the Owens expedition really was always the one I came back to and always kind of was stuff that was an outlier that I find a name that wasn't anywhere else. The Owens expedition was always the one that was confirmed, if that makes sense, by other sources. So, so some of these names, there's commonalities. One is that you'll notice that the prefix ga is attached to most all of these names, which refers to a place, and the suffix ka, which refers to abundance. So, and yeah, so I guess with that, I guess I'm gonna jump in. Well, actually, I'm gonna go back here. I don't have a slide for Gaminis Tigwaya. So starting in Thunder Bay, there's a very large river, and I don't know how to say it in English, quote unquote. I don't know how it's pronounced. I don't know personally any like Thunder Bay people, despite the fact that we go there literally once a week for gymnastics.
Is it Kaministiquia?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's not how it's supposed to be said. It's Gaminis Tigwaya, and every part of that, and of all these rivers from Thunder Bay to here, that's like the best like preserved as far as it's written and how it's supposed to sound in Ojibwe, and yet it's not pronounced Gaminis Tigwaya. How do you say it again?
Kaministiquia.
Kaministiquia. Okay, so the interesting thing about that river name is one is that it's written exactly like how the Ojibwe name is. It has the ga, place of, Minis refers to islands, and Tigway refers to a river in a verb sense, like a river is doing something. So if you translated that directly, it means the river that flows to islands. And the reason it's called that is there's two large islands at the mouth of the Gaminis Tigwaya River. How do you say it again?
Kaministiquia.
Kaministiquia, I'm gonna remember that. I drive by this river like over it like once a week and still I'm like, that's that Kaministiquia. But anyway, so, yeah, and that was a really important, I mean, Fort William is on it, the original fort, so it's a very important, place for Ojibwe people. Fort William Band, Grand Portage Band, an important place for seasonal harvest as well. Yeah, but the interesting thing about that, that's one of the few rivers I've ever heard of anywhere that employs that medial Tigwaya in its name. Like, despite the fact that, like, if you're describing a river, you could say Gichi Tigwaya, which means it's a fast river, or I don't know, Munga Tigwaya, so it's a wide river. But, you know, you can stick any verb to that Tigwaya medial and describe a river, and yet very few Ojibwe place names throughout Ojibwe country employ that for the name, and I'm not exactly sure why. So anyway, that's just a little bit in the weeds there, I guess. But so starting in the United States, in America, and going from the North Shore, the border down to Duluth here, the Pigeon River, Omini Zibe, and we're told that this is by our Grand Portage elders that this has to do with and by numerous archival accounts as well, that this has to do with the abundance of passenger pigeons and I've, Grand Portage elders told me that one of the things they used to do was roast them. So I'm not sure about the taste of roasted pigeons, but it's one of those things where this river, and the picture is High Falls, which is, you guys probably know the highest waterfall in Minnesota. But this is like one of the easy ones. It's just direct. It means what it says. We have good documentation for it. We could have oral history and tradition about it. So Omini Zibe, it is what it is. So forming the northern border of both the United States and Grand Portage. So Muskegawgama Zibe, the reservation river, Muskegawgama Zibe does not mean reservation. It means a cranberry marsh. And specifically, it means a lake that is a cranberry marsh. So now today there isn't really a source of the reservation river, really a cranberry marsh. So that's that part of it's kind of lost to time. But in the Treaty of 54 back there, this is one of the sources that calls this out as this is the Ojibwe name, Cranberry Marsh River, because they talk about how the reservation boundary goes from back then. It didn't go all the way to the Pigeon River. It went in the treaty. It only goes up to Hat Point on the northern part of the bay down to Reservation River. So later becomes the reservation boundary and is called the English Reservation River. So pretty straight, semi straightforward. So Ga Bibikwe, Wanishka, Gokag, Zibe, the Flute Reed River. This is one of these that, when I'm doing these historical projects, I'm always wanting like a second edition. And I can't remember if this is on the map or not. Where's the map? Oh, it isn't. Okay, so yeah, someday we're gonna have to do a second edition of the map because I didn't say hold the presses and I should have. So Bibigwe is a verb that means he or she plays the flute. This medial ashko refers to reeds, grass, whatever. And so this is literally what it means. So it literally takes this name, place of abundant flute reeds, and translates it to English. Now, the thing I discovered, unfortunately, after the map was printed, was that Bibigwe Wanishko is the Ojibwe name for the elderberry. So if we were really gonna translate this really accurately, it'd be called the Elderberry River. Instead, this is like a very literal translation of what this is saying. So again, I'm unsure about the connection between elderberries and, well, actually, no, I'm not unsure. Because if you take an elderberry and you can hollow it out. And so I think that's what this is, kind of pointing to. So, but again, this was something that the map was out. A couple months later, I'm sitting in my office and I say elderberry, and I see this thing and I don't even remember what it was. And it said elderberry, Bibigwe Wanishko. And I was like, that's what that, and I just, yeah. So it is what it is. So, yeah. Wissakote Zibe, the Brule River, Wissakote refers to burnt wood, Brule refers to burnt wood. So this is a good example of how, in a lot of places around Ojibwe country, not just on the North Shore, the translation is sometimes direct, but it only made it as far as French, because all of these places had, at some point on a map, had their Ojibwe name translated into French, and in some cases, for 100 years or more. And then sometimes translated in English and sometimes not. And Brule River is one of these places where it's not. So common Ojibwe name throughout Ojibwe country. Of course, there's another Brule River on the South Shore, right? So yeah, referring to I believe the water, the color of the water. So yeah, fairly common geographic feature. Consistent across, no kind of discrepancy about what the Brule River is named. No kind of great mystery about why it's called that. So. Unlike Montague and Montagakowini Zibe, the Devil Track River. So this is a great kind of instructive thing. And this is why I was kind of really pushed hard to have the assignment mailing happen. Now, off the reservation, but at Devil Trap River specifically, because Montague, Matagakwa, Zibe is the coolest name. I think throughout Ojibwe country, it means the spirits are walking on the ice. To me, that's like the coolest name. Now, this Devil Track, you know, this is a good example of how a lot of times when missionaries came into not just Ojibwe, but all native communities, they changed names that had to do with spirits to devils, right? So like where I'm from, Laputere, there's Devil's Lake. Well, the original name of that is Montagu's Aga Iganing. And even in Dakota country, you know, the Devil's Lake Reservation changed its name to the Spirit Lake Reservation, which more adequately, you know, reflects what the Dakota name is. So yeah, so this is just, I mean, not only is it just, you know, it's not just Spirit Lake though. I mean, Spirit Lake's a, you know, important name, but like, to me, it's not just, it's just missing this whole thing of like, you know, leaving tracks on the ice and walking on the ice, and it's just such a unique and beautiful name. So that's why I was really like, we've gotta have this sign unveiling at Devil Trap, you know, we're gonna make a statement, we're gonna be off-res, but also this, like, to me, this name is why this project's important, right? I mean, it's cool to say, oh, Wisakode is the original name of Brule River, but this is the thing that's actually doing more restorative work, if that makes sense. So, Oganikon Zibe, so south of Grand Marais now is the Fall River, named after this waterfall near its mouth. And so with this and Cascade River, there's this really funky thing that's happening where and I haven't really pinpointed when, and I certainly haven't pinpointed why this happens, but they take, because Ojibways typically didn't like name creeks. There's just not a lot of, there's a few exceptions to that on the North Shore, but really, you know, smaller creeks just didn't have a name for whatever reason. And yet we just don't have any surviving documents or old tradition of that. But what happens at Fall River is this term, Oganikon, means abundant rose hips. And if you know anything about Grand Marais, you know that there's a creek right to the west of Fall River called Rose Hip Creek. So they kind of, you know, called Fall River after this waterfall, and then called the Rose Hip River this creek that's right next to it. So not sure why that happens, but the exact same thing happens at Ishkingwe Zibe, the Cascade River. So Cascade, and you guys probably maybe have a better sense for this, since there's a big like sign that says Cut Face Creek, right? When you're just before Grand Marais, just south of Grand Marais. Well, Cut Face was actually the name of the Cascade River. So again, unsure why they, you know, changed the English name to Cascade and then called the next smaller water body next to it the Cut Face Creek. Don't know, but it's this weird little thing that happens twice just south of Grand Marais. So just
Does that mean cut face, like, is the face part mean?
it has to do with the
Rock?
rock being,
Okay.
be having like erosion, I think,
Yeah.
basically. Yep. Da Manaza Dika Zibe, the Poplar River, Azade is a poplar tree, Manazade is an ugly poplar tree. Also poplar. So if you're gonna translate this literally, it's also Poplar River, so, but fairly similar to its Ojibwe name, going to be similar. Chicago Miz Yikane Zibe, the Onion River, again, very much a literal translation. Well, I usually talk about the Onion River. So the Onion River is like kind of today at least, is kind of the northern extent of wild onions or leeks. Historically, I've read some stuff that kind of suggests that there was like, so if you go through Holborn, further up by the Blue River, there's that Chicago Bay, and I read something, but it's not something I trust 100%, that it's named after abundance of wild onions. I don't know if I buy that, but anyway, well, let me back this up a little bit. So anytime in Ojibwe country you see Shigag in a place name, it doesn't necessarily refer to smelling like a skunk, although I think people like to say, oh, Chicago stinks, so it's named for skunks. That's not the case at all. It actually refers to the plains around where Chicago is, used to have abundant wild onions as well. So yeah, so that Chicago Bay up in Holborn, apparently that was named for leeks. I've seen in one source. My guess is that, I mean, here's the thing about that is that, the the North Shore has changed and stuff hasn't moved south, it's moved north, right? Does that make sense? So a good example, best example of this is like, 100 years ago, there were deer on the North Shore. Like deer are technically an invasive species in the North Shore, but as the land was cut over and the climate warmed up, deer moved up north. So to me, if you say, well, there was abundant wild onions in Hopeland, that's kind of having it ass backwards, if that makes sense, to what we've seen in the past 100 years on the North Shore. So, anyway, and it makes sense, like I've, taken students with Marnie down to the Onion River vicinity and, Temperance River to harvest wild onions, because that's really the furthest north you can be and still get them in any kind of abundance.
Is this what they call ramps?
Yes, wild leeks, or wild onions, leeks or rams, yep. Yeah, so. Ga Weenbosch Gazibe, Temperance River, so, the Temperance River is a funny one because, this goes back to the original surveyors in the late 19th century, they were going through, surveying, going mostly using the waterways along the shore and looking at these rivers and things like that, and most of these rivers on the North Shore have a, sandbar at the mouth, not really flip a long ways. There we go. There's Baptism, big sandbar, Beaver River, big sandbar. And so they got up to Temperance River. And, the Ojibwe name is a place of hollow reeds, Weenbosch, or Ween means hollow, Ushk is that medial, which means grass. And they looked at it and they're like, well, there's no sandbar here. It's the No Bar River. And so this was the time the temperance movement was like going, America's like, oh, Temperance River. No Bar River. So anyway, oh, and then also, so one of the kind of, I guess this is a river technically, but Brule Lake up on the border of the Boundary Waters. The Ojibwe name for that, and I included it on the map. Less because it was, I'm sure it was an important, just like everything else, site for Ojibwe, Grand Portage subsistence, but also because it's got a great Ojibwe name. Gaedewe Ojiji one, and it means where the river flows in both directions. And what that refers to is that Brule Lake is the source of the Brule River, but it's also the source of the Temperance River on its western edge. So it's kind of like this cool geographic feature that you don't see a lot. But again, the Ojibwe describes this really well, and I'm not sure at what point, they just call it, oh, it's the headwaters of the Brule, is called Brule Lake, but to me, the Ojibwe name is just describing something that's just so much like cooler than what, just saying, oh, Brule Lake, Brule River. Ina Unane Zibe, the Cross River. So I'm gonna actually start forward with this name Cross River. So some of you guys might be familiar with this story, and that's the monument that the Catholic Church built there, is that Frederick Baraga, who was a long time bishop in Michigan, but also had a mission in LaPointe. He tried to go from LaPointe on Madeline Island to Grand Portage, his Birchbark canoe. And so during that kind of foolhardy adventure, he got caught in a storm and he was blown south to Schroeder, where the Cross River enters Lake Superior. And so he was so grateful for his for making it alive, he planted a cross there in the Catholic Church, I think, what does that say, the 40s? Oh, that's the original date, sometime in the 20th century, took out the original cross and put a monument there, but, so Jibe Atego Zibe, so a Jibe is a ghost and, Ateg means something that's wooden, so in Ojibwe, a cross is referred to like a ghost wood. Something like that, so that's literally what a cross is in Ojibwe, but there's all these before his, this happened to Baraga in 1846, yeah. So before 1846, we have this recorded in the Owens expedition, I believe, as well as the original survey maps of Minnesota that have this Ina Unane. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what that meant. And my colleague, Mike Zimmerman, who teaches at Cook County High School, he's from Michigan originally, but he's unbelievable with language and his knowledge of word parts. He thought, because we didn't have this spelled out, right, like in modern Ojibwe orthography, it was just kind of spelled phonetically. And he was like, well, it's probably in a o. So instead of in a u non, in a u nine, which means a boatman. So in a o is somebody who is, he or she is crossing a water body and like steering it basically, and that inine means like a man. So for a long time we had this as boatman, and I don't know, something about that historic graphic, you know, just the history of it did not sit well with me. And so finally I asked one of the first speakers we worked with a lot, Gordon Jourdain, who also taught for a long time at UMD. I asked him about this. I was like, you know, this is really bugging me. Does this make sense to you? He said, no, that isn't what it is. I showed him the phonetic spelling. He said, it's in a u, nane, not ini, and that refers to bestowing. It's this verb in a uj, which means something you're bestowed to, but he was saying that it really has more of a spiritual context, like a gifting and like a ceremony. Because we have the term mata-uki, which means to share something or distribute something, but this really means more bestowing, and it has this kind of elevated meaning. And so I mean, to me that like clicked a lot more, and it also kind of suggested to me that this was always kind of an important spiritual place for Ojibwe people. So that, you know, you have this Christian traditions that begins in 1846 with Baraga planting his cross there, but you also had maybe a tradition before that refers to spirituality and ceremonies. Now, I don't have any whatever to hard evidence to back that up, but linguistically, there's that suggestion. So, I mean, again, we don't know for sure. We don't have a thing that said, oh, you know, there were ceremonies or whatever here, but it's something that's lost to time, but it's, I don't know, to me, it's pretty powerful, this name. This is why I'd actually like to see, you know, even more so than these other ones kind of see go up, is that like kind of restoring this, like, to me, I think this is like a really powerful name. So it's spiritual name related to traditional spirituality. So the rest of them aren't quite as I guess deep as the rest of them. Winde, Zibe, 2 island river, 2 islands floating. Winde means it floats. This is one we kind of struggled with too, because and this is a good example about how Grand Portage Ojibwe is something that follows other Border Lakes dialects, so communities at Boys Ford, but also Lac LaCroix on the Ontario side, Winsiminikaning, Kuchiching, more so than it does communities in the rest of Minnesota, central Minnesota, or northwest Wisconsin. That being said, the difference between Border Lakes Ojibwe and the Ojibwe that's spoken like central Minnesota is very minuscule. So like 95% of it's the same. This was one that tripped us up because floating in like where I'm from in Wisconsin, you use the term magonde. So this was, again, I had to talk to Gordon Jourdain about this one. He's like, a wind day, it floats. And I was like, oh, and then, you know, the thing about this was what happens, then I put it in the Ojibwe People's Dictionary of wind day, it's right there, it floats. So Border Lakes dialects. So yeah, but that's a good one I always talk about, because, you know, in language revitalization, a lot of people are kind of, I'd say, stymied by dialects, and they're really wigged out by dialects, especially the fact that I think in a lot of communities, not all, but in a lot of communities like where I'm from in Wisconsin, you know, they just have a lot, not a lot, but more first speakers in Ontario and these Border Lakes communities that we have. And so I think there's a certain amount of defensiveness that goes along, like, oh, they're speaking Canadian Ojibwe, it's different. Well, it really isn't, because we did this entire project and, you know, there's what, 20, 25 names here. And I think there's Winde, and there's maybe another one where the dialect is different. And even there, it's not like it's Magonde and Winde. It's not like it's like, you know, something that's totally incomprehensible. It's just, you know, wasn't, you know, immediately evident to us. So, and I don't count because my language skills are not that good. So, yeah, so anyway. But, so that's always my little dialect speech, is that, you know, nobody should be afraid of dialects, because the thing with Ojibwe is all these word parts, they might be constructed a little differently, but, again, in 10 to, or less than 10% of the case, but, it's still comprehensible to a person who has like a skilled speaker, if that makes sense, so. A dick Ojibwe, and a dick isn't a dick isn't a dick, I mean, that's just something, a caribou is a caribou is a caribou, no matter where you go, so. Nice and easy, nice and straightforward, there's a little oral tradition about this, I get into that in the article about how, one of our Grand Portage elders was saying this was named after, Swamper Caribou, who was, I think son or grandson of the chief that signed the 54 treaty from Grand Portage, Coons, who was Little Caribou. And Swamper Caribou was a really important figure in Grand Marais and Cook County, throughout the, late 19th century, and he lived at the mouth for a time at the mouth of the Caribou River, so, yeah, anyway, Ga Gichi Gami, Wangag Zibe, the Little Manitou River, that's not what it means a place of a great round sandy shore, so, I worked with, WTIP in Grand Marais, the, photojournalist there, M. Baxley, he took these great photos for this project and for the article for me, but he, you know, we had this issue because this is one of the few waterways, you know, it's a smaller river, right? You go by and you're up on 61 and it's way down there. It's just this little narrow thing. And there's these tall cliffs. But this entire shore that's referred to in this name and seen in this picture is owned by a private individual, which is pretty rare on the North Shore, right? So that the mouth of a river is, you know, owned privately and you can't get to it. So I had this, and I don't know, do I have time to tell this like kind of long tangential story? I'm gonna do it anyway. So I had this thing where before, you know, M kind of went and flew his drone probably illegally up and took this picture. I was like, I can't get a picture of the Little Manitou River, you know, and he's like, well, you know, I'll do that. But I did this presentation a few times and I even did some internet sleuthing about, you know, I went on the Lake County, like, land portal. I was like, who owns this? And it was this, person, Barbara Slade. And I'm like, okay, well, that's it. So then, all right, I'm not too ashamed. It's like, Google this person. And they're on the, board for the James J. Hill Foundation. Well, it turns out they're James J. Hill descendant. And so just complete, so I gave this talk at North House Folk School a couple of times, and I had some audience members that were from Silver Bay and said, hey, we know the caretakers, we'll get you in. And I'm still waiting on that call. But in the meantime, and this was like during COVID, you might remember this guy, there was this guy in my Ojibwe language table online, Andrew Slade. And I never put this together because and somebody was telling me, like a person of a person was saying, oh yeah, well, there's a guy, Andrew Slade. I was like, I know that guy. So anyway, so as soon as like the weather clears up, he's like, yeah, go in there. And if anybody gives you grief, just say, you know, Andrew said it was okay. So one of these days I'm gonna make my perilous journey to the home. So, anyway, I don't really have anything else about that. Oh, so here's the other example of just this tiny little dialect difference. Manitou Wishi Zibe, the Manitou River, literally means the spirit layer river, or a wish is a layer or a lodge. Other places like where I'm from, you call it lodge, would be the same word. So something that's very similar sounding, very comprehensible. So, but yeah, the other, and that one didn't trip us up at all. We're like, oh, that is.
Eric, did the Little Manitou River, the Round Shore River, get its name derivative from this?
I think so, yeah, I think it's one of these things where like, you know, like the cricks where it's just like, we'll just, you know, give it, it's the smaller one, we'll call it the Little Manitou, and yeah, you know, as far as I can tell, yeah, so. Wagino Kaming Zibe, the Little Marais River, domed earth, this is actually, I took this on Highway 61 because there's a resort there, and I was like, I drove in. I'm gonna quit telling my like stories about trespassing. I drove in, I was like, should I go knock on their door? I was like, I better not. But you know, a small river, domed earth. There's a thing I think close to the mouth, and this would be nice if I could go up there and check it out. But actually, I think it's portrayed in the Owens book. It kind of shows a sketch of this like dome at the mouth or near the mouth of the Little Marais River, which comes from the Ojibwe name, so that comes, yeah. So anyway, one of the more, I think, prominent things, you can see it right on Highway 61, there, Asin, Badakide, Zibe, the baptism river. Not sure about the English name baptism, but Standing Rock River, fairly, you know, there's the big standing, this thing got a laser pointer, you guys can see what I'm talking about, the big standing rock at the mouth of this river's named after, so, yeah. And, God, Gichi Gami, the Beaver River. Beaver River doesn't mean, God, Gichi Gami doesn't mean Beaver River, it means place of abundant little cedars. And I'm not sure about the changeover from Beaver to Little Cedar River, but I don't know. So that's kind of like within the area of the map. I think I might have Split Rock, but, so as far as going from, Beaver Bay to Duluth here, a lot of these are fairly straightforward. Split Rock is really kind of one of those things that's, lost to time, and the Owens map, as well as the original survey, both call it in English the Split Rock River. Now, there was a missionary, Gillifan, Joseph Gillifan, who was a missionary in Whiteard, and he produced, you can Google it, it will pop right up, this list of Ojibwe names throughout Ojibwe country, but he includes the North Shore. And he said that Split Rock was this name, Gnu Wabiko Zibe, gold, which he translated as Golden Eagle Iron River, Iron Golden Eagle River, however you want to say that. The Gnu is the Golden Eagle part, the Wabiko is the talking about iron. So, but every other source, including Owens, including the Trig survey, says that name belongs to Silver Creek, just outside of Two Harbors. So the other thing that's a little suspect, so, you know, maybe one day again, just like this thing with the Elderberry River, something will surface that like, oh, this is the Split Rock name. The other thing that's interesting about that name, regardless of where it is Gillifan is the only person that translates that name as Golden Eagle Iron River. But if you want to talk about something being long, it's GNU spelled like that, but GNU and GNU sound exactly alike. So I'm wondering if that name is actually talking about like a long rock instead of a Golden Eagle Iron River. That would make a little more sense than something on the North Shore named after a GNU, but lost the time. It could be out there in some document, you know, who knows? So gooseberry is gooseberry, Jabu, Menakane, Zibe. Gooseberry straightforward. Crow Creek was Gagaga, Gi, Wabiko, Zibe, place of the Iron Raven River. Encampment River, Minising, Zibe refers to the islands outside of its mouth. Silver Creek we talked about. Stewart River, B2 Bigo Zibe. So B2B is a really interesting word. It's very like that's very like, you see it a lot in Ojibwe, so it refers to layering. So like B2 Sijigun is a pie, B2shkigun is your underwear, because it's like a pie is layered, your underwear are like part of your clothing layer. So, and this B2B, the B part refers to water. But talking about layering and geographic, I think that's like a really interesting name, because the other place you see this all the time, does anybody know where else this occurs in a geographic name? Grand Marais is called Gichi Gami, and it's called that because, you know, you can see it when you're driving down, you know, the big mountain, and you're coming into Grand Marais and you're on the Gunfoot, you look down, there's like a harbor here, a piece of land. And so that name refers to the great place of layering, basically, where there's these two layers. And so this word is so like, it's just this, wow. And then similarly, the Stewart River runs parallel to Silver Creek. So there's this thing about layering of water. So it's this weird thing where, you know, I think in our maybe modern minds today, we can see, okay, a pie is layered, my underwear is layered clothes. But Ojibwe's really extended that layering meaning to these waterways that ran parallel to each other, if that makes sense. And to me, that's like, you know, you talk about like lost in maybe it's not lost in translation, but it's like this bigger sense of translating stuff, if that makes sense. So, but you see this all the time with like, you know, like Ojibwe, where I call it like umbrella meanings, where you have these like grammatical terms that mean different things in different contexts. And to my mind, this idea of layering is another thing where you have this very literal thing, but you also have this geographical thing that maybe our modern minds doesn't make as much sense, but it does make sense. From there, pretty straightforward, Mukamani Zibe, the Knife River. I read something it's named that because the the rocks at the bottom of the Knife River are sharp. I don't know if I believe that. That's from like a local historian in Grand Marais in the fifties, so I don't know if I believe that, but could be. Sucker River, Name, Bene, Zibe, a place of abundant suckers, that makes sense. Amblasigo Zibe, I think dry wood is the translation there, and then Lester River, Basa, Bika, Zibe, referring to the way the rock is cut, I believe, so. Yeah, but anyway, I kind of sailed through the last ones. Questions? Yes.
Hi, we're there.
Yeah.
I just told my dad you were teaching this, and he said that if you lied to me, he would tell me the real name of the rivers, because my dad's from Grand Portage. I said, Eric's doing great. Question for you though.
Well, you have a connection to the Devil Track River.
Yeah. Because there's that story, that I grew up hearing it, now I feel like my family lied to me, but
Well, it could be why they call it the Devil Track.
because, I was gonna, you want me to share that story or?
Absolutely, go
Okay.
for it.
So I'm one of 3 Sam Zimmermans. The oldest of them was kind of a figure in Cook County in Grand Portage. He was white. He was married to an Anishinaabe from Bad River. He survived the Sioux Uprising, came up to the north, married an Ojibwe woman, name was Sam. He had an injury in his leg from his childhood. But he used to run traps and traders and, tours through that area of the country. He was on, I guess what they call, what do they call when they take them out into the bush to go hunt or whatever, but.
Fast?
I mean, it wasn't fasting, but he had taken some people out. But, they were trapping, took me a second, 'cause I'm hungry, trapping, for fox and, he was a big fox and beaver person.
The trap line.
Trap line, thank you. My grandmother just heard me and is not happy, but, during that time, he lost a leg. He refused to come back, they took his leg off, they said you can stay out, we can take your leg off, or you can go back in, and he was like, take the leg. Took the leg, kept going, well, he had a crutch because of it. And from that, this was back in like 1870s kind of time frame. So I mean, he was 90 during World War II, like he was quite a character. But because people were seeing his footprint and then seeing the crutch print look like a hoof. So they said the spirit walks at night. They nicknamed it, and they named it after him. So there's that story as well that I grew up hearing, and then I remember being like, and so growing up in my family, I was like, I'm the Sam with 2 legs. That was how I referred to myself. But that was the name that they gave him because of his trap lines, because it looked like a hoof. It was a homemade leg. My question for you though, which you're listening, in your research, a lot of the bays, the names of the bays are lost. Did you find in the Owen's book or anything like that, did you find any language of the original Ojibwe names? Because that was also like, some of the bays were gathering places too. And I'm wondering if you found anything like that.
Well, Chicago Bay, that's one that's still kind of up in the air. They're real utilitarian ones that I found. Oh man, it's gonna take forever. It's clicking away. Where'd you go, man? Oh man, there we go. Okay, so let's see, where is it? Where's my other info? Oh, there it is, it's in blue. So, Wequay Dunes, Horseshoe Bay is just named, Little Bay, right? So the names of the bays aren't very evocative, except for, and this is another problem with this Gillifan. Gillifan does a good job, like 85% right, 15% he really like messes up. So he messes up 2 ways, and I didn't mention this. He actually says that Manu Bernadagaco Zibe is the name for Devil Track, but it's also the name for the Manitou River, which is false based on the Owen survey as well as the original trig papers, 2 independent sources earlier that kind of verify that. The other thing he does is he calls Reservation River Ga Miswa Tawangag Zibe. And for a long time, a few months, I sat on that. I was like, well, why would he call it like Red Sand River? And so I was like, how come the treaty says it's the Cranberry Marsh River and a couple other things say that? Well, one survey says that. Then I found a document that actually refers to Red Rock, which you think about it, that's Red Rock is this little, red sand, red pebble, Bay, so Red Rock Bay is the one we still kind of have the original Ojibwe name for, but.
Original.
Yeah. And of course, Gichi Gami, right? Yeah. Yes,
I've got two comments. First about the Mukamani, ZB. I learned recently, some of the archaeologists here have known for a long time, that there were copper mines, there were surface copper mines, in Knife River.
oh,
And I keep wondering if, old copper tools, knives, or whatever, were made there, and that's why it was called
right,
Mukamani ZB. So that's my speculation.
that makes a lot more sense than just the rock being sharp.
And then-
To my experience, rocks are always sharp and shallow, North Shore rivers, but,
And then,
Squabic
yeah.
is the word,
well, that's the name for copper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Redmond. And the only time it's red is when you heat it,
Yep.
and, the only time it's red, the rest of it's silver or
Green.
or green. Yeah.
And then the second comment was just kind of a personal story that, when I first started taking Ojibwe language classes, when you introduce yourself, you used to have to say where you're from, and I live near Two Harbors. So I just came up with my own Ojibwe name for Two Harbors was Nisha-Wikwadenong. So I'd always say I'm from Nisha-Wikwadenong. My family's had, for many years, had a summer cabin in the Keweenaw Peninsula. And we're in a harbor that has two bays. And recently I learned from people in Baraga, from Keweenaw Bay Indian community, that the Ojibwe name for that place is Nisha-Wikwadenong. So almost, I said Nisha-Wikwadenong, because I thought that was plural, but they had basically the same name. So I live in two places that are called Nisha-Wikwadenong.
It's like the two Brule Rivers, it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, some of the stuff.
But I don't know if I came up with the right name, it was just my name for Two Harbors, but it makes sense.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think I saw something, but I can't quite pull Two Harbors out of the dusty parts of my brain.
But at least that name was used somewhere on Lake Superior, so
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting.
Some of the names of the rivers, like one's got a lot of cedars near it, hollow reeds, pines. Is the geography or the geology of the North Shore that different, that different things are prominent in different places?
I don't wanna say I don't think so, but, not so much, but I think what this refers to is just different land use things.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, it is, right? I mean, anywhere you go, anywhere really, you're gonna find like, oh, this is a good spot for onions, or this is a good spot for, whatever. That's common across that same area, but to me, I think a lot of these names kind of speak to an original end use that's kind of lost to time, because like Poplar River, for example, you drive by Poplar River and it's all cedars, you drive by what was used to be called the Little Cedar River, but now it's called Beaver River, and there ain't too many cedars around there, so. Yeah, and a lot of that stuff, of course, was lost to clear cutting, right, so, yeah. But some of them, like Onion River, it's still the place to go for onions, for wild leeks, so.
Isn't the upper bay, like, is it spearfishing? At Portage?
Yeah, so that's a great example there of the bays being named, is we still have the Ojibwe name for Waswaganing Bay on the Grand Portage Reservation, but there's one where like, you're talking about Waswa, which means he or she is fishing by torch at night. People don't really, spearfish, let alone even fish for walleyes in Waswaganing Bay anymore. They fish on the Pigeon River for walleyes, but so that's something where we kind of lost that to time too. Like, why is that called the spearfishing river when people in Portage don't really spearfish? Well, don't spearfish, so. And it's not really a place that, and even, we've had land change over the last 100 years. Lake hasn't changed that much, like to where it's like, oh yeah, there used to be tons of walleyes here. I mean, yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense why that's related to like spearing walleyes, but I mean, maybe there's something out there that'll, some document that'll describe and, talk about it. So,
Eric, you talk about some names being transferred to a neighboring water body. Can you date when the transfer happened?
The Fall River was very recent, like, and by recent, I mean like 1890s, 1900. And in fact, there was a thing, and I forget why I contacted Cook County, it was about something completely unrelated, but I contacted Cook County Historical Society, and they said, this is me, you know, being a recent arrival in the North Shore, they said, actually, they wanted to change the name of the Fall River back to the Rosehip River, in English, of course, but, and in like the mid-90s, there was a motion on the county board and it failed. And it actually had some residents supported it, and it just kind of didn't go anywhere, so, so that one's recent. Cascade, actually, the, original survey maps in Minnesota, I think that part was 1870s. It actually lists both, Gichi Gami as the name of that river and Cascade River. It has both of them, so Cascade has a lot longer of a history, and I'm not exactly sure why. But, I mean, it's a beautiful river, it's got nice cascades. So,
Well, I was just wondering if there could be some ominous reason like land contracts or like that would describe a piece of land by its proximity to something, and then somebody wants to change that and just tells whoever is the arbitrator, well, it's that river that has this.
Right.
Something like that.
I think that's possible, although you know, I mean, the thing about the North Shore is that, like, this isn't like the Ohio River Valley, right? Where you have settlers like or Oklahoma, settlers storming the land. I mean, it's cold and it's, you know,
Yeah.
it's sparsely populated even until, you know, recent times. So, but it's possible. I mean, anything's possible, you know, just some person said, oh yeah, that's the name of this. And, you know, the surveyor just wrote it down that way, the common surveyor, so.
Any info on Kimball Creek? I know
Kimball
you said
Creek.
the creeks are kind of in conflict, but over that.
Yeah, well, okay, so there's Kimball Creek, and then there's, Cadunce River, right? So Cadunce is named after a Grand Portage band member who took a land, homestead on Cadunce Creek at the mouth. And so that river has an English name, Diarrhea River, and I didn't include that on the map, because there's no like whatever of like that as an Ojibwe name, but one day I'm sure that'll surface, and you know, there we'll have it, so we'll have a supplement, you know, that and elderberry stuff. Kimball Creek, I haven't seen anything about the name of it, but I've read a lot of stuff about Kimball Creek because my wife, the other side of her family, is a descendant of Jack Scott, who was a non-native guy who was married to Catherine Boyer, who was a native woman, and that means their piece of land was at the mouth of Kimball Creek in the 1870s and 80s. So, yeah, so but anyway, my point is you know, I've done a lot of reading about Kimball Creek just through like her family history and the non-Bishaw part, and it's always called Kimball Creek. So I don't know, like earlier if it was just, yeah. And you know, what kind of like, I mean, this is just me thinking out loud, but like, what I think maybe the Rosehip Creek and the Cutface Creek maybe tells us is that maybe those creeks that were right next to the main waterway had the same name, and they just called them Zedings, you know, like little Cutface, River and little, Rosehip River, but maybe those creeks then retained that name once they renamed the English. Could be, I don't know, that's just me kind of taking a swing. Anything else?
Cutface is the corner right there where Thompsonite is found.
Yep.
And you got two layers. That's why the creek, Cutface Creek. And Chicago Bay, Dillinger had his place on in Hoagland there. I've got stones in my garden from his fireplace.
Huh.
And that's where they came in. That's where they come in with big launches and America could pull in there.
What's next? Your next project, besides the revised edition of this 10 years down the road.
Well, one of the things I've been working on is it's actually more like, stories and kind of doing stuff for, well, a couple of things. One is that we've been working on this series of children's books, and this is the first proof, but we want to have these bilingual children's books that kind of describe, Ojibwe kind of harvest activities. This one's about rabbit snaring. So a little different, you know, than the like hard historical research and it's good to do different things, right? But the other thing is I have a radio show on WTIP where I interview first speakers in both English and Ojibwe. And so we're working on this project where we have transcriptions of their Ojibwe and their English and kind of organize it by topic. So we're looking to build kind of different curricular resources for basically high school age and also, I guess, for use in non-native schools and whatnot, but also for use in our Ojibwe language classes, is trying to kill two birds with one stone with these projects. So, yeah, always something.
Go back to your one of your first slides, and you were talking about the Owens. The Owen was the, so why is it the David Owen expedition, but Norwood
Is the
was
guy on
doing
the
the
ground?
survey? Was that part of it?
He was the guy on the ground, yeah. Owens wasn't out here, but
So, I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
But
No,
he's the guy
Owen
that
is the one
compiles
that
this?
died?
yeah.
Okay,
But Norwood is the guy on the ground, the head guy on the ground,
okay.
you know.
So I just didn't understand if it was,
It was kind of the best of both. It was the Owens expedition, but he didn't actually have to go. Like,
He was all over, you know, at Big Sandy Lake. On that big esker there's that big erratic boulder on top. It's called the Norwood Stone. And then there was Glacial Lake Norwood up north.
Yeah, this book isn't just about the North Shore. It's about Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Northern Illinois. It's like got a big reach.
okay.
There any books on like the geological survey, like a historical?
I want to refer to the room for that one. There was a guy, I think he was from UMD, that wrote an article about the Owens expedition and kind of talked about a little bit about the history of geological exploration, which I'll admit I'm a little less whatever on, a little less up on than I probably should be here. But, yeah, I can't think of like the guy that did that, but Kurt Mead sent it to me, but.
UWS had all of that own stuff in their basement, and it flooded and ruined most everything. Yeah. The originals.
Yeah.
The geological surveys on the main year website. I think, so as far back as they were able to digitize. You can find some of them from right after the 54, 56, you know, it was just first being settled. And they went through and did a big geological survey. And then there's actually a couple of appendix that go with those. That lists some of the Ojibwe names and some of the